The whip cracked across the mud a finger's width from Maren Callow's boot, and the entire registration yard laughed. "That's your pet?" Lady Isolde Stagg said it loudly enough to carry over the noise of 400 wolves, and the yard obliged her by going quiet at exactly the right moment, the way crowds always do when someone highborn is about to be cruel. She sat her gray mare at the edge of the enrollment ring in riding leathers the color of dried blood, and she pointed the coiled end of her whip at the creature crouched behind Maren's legs. "I've seen better meat on a fence post," Isolde said. "Is it dying? Did you bring it here to die in front of the king?" The laughter came again, bigger this time, and it hit Maren the way cold water hits, all at once, everywhere, stealing the air. She did not step back. She had learned a long time ago that stepping back only made them louder. "He's entered in the beast trials," she said. "The purse is 40 crowns. The rules say any handler may enter any beast of sound wind. The rules say a great many things." Isolde tipped her head. "They also say beastkind must be leashed at the throat in the presence of the blood, and that thing is leashed at the throat. So I suppose you've read them." "How charming," the kennel girl reads. "Kennel warden," Maren said. "Kennel warden," Isolde repeated, tasting it, discarding it. "Of Stonewater, aren't you? The pack that isn't." That was the one that landed. Maren felt it go in under the ribs, clean, the way a well-made knife goes in. Stonewater had been a pack once. 60 families along a river that ran green in summer and black in flood. A hall with a slate roof. A bond stone worn smooth by 11 generations of hands. Then 11 years ago, the Registry had ruled its charter void on a technicality of record-keeping, and the land had gone to forfeiture, and the forfeiture had gone to auction, and the auction had gone to a syndicate whose name nobody could ever quite find written down. Stonewater was a sheep pasture now. Maren was what was left of it, 19 years old, indentured to the royal vaunt as a scrubber of kennels, with a debt mark burned into the leather of her wrist cuff, and a mother buried under a marker that read "B. Callow, false recorder," because the Registry had insisted on the word. "Move along, my lady," Maren said. "You're blocking the line." The yard made a sound, not a laugh this time. A low, delighted "oh," the sound a crowd makes when someone small does something stupid and brave. Isolde's face went very still. Her whip hand twitched, and the creature behind Maren's legs stood up. He did it slowly, the way something starved does everything, and he did not growl, and he did not bare his teeth. He simply rose out of his crouch until he stood level with Maren's hip, and put himself between her and the horse. That was all. But every wolf in the front rank of that crowd took a half step back, and none of them afterward could have told you why. He was, by any honest measure, a wretched animal. Gray-black, patchy at the flank, ribs showing like the frames of a half-built boat. Too long in the leg for a hound and too narrow in the skull for a proper wolf, with a gait that hitched on the left, where something had healed wrong. His forepaws were strange, the toes too long, the pads too soft, as if they had spent years being something else. Around his neck, under the leather lead, sat a collar of dull gray metal, seamless, with no buckle and no hinge, so close to the skin that the fur had never grown back beneath it. And his eyes were wrong. They were amber, which was ordinary. What was not ordinary was that they were reading, not watching, the way a beast watches for the next movement. Reading, the way a clerk reads a column of figures he already suspects is false. "Filthy thing," Isolde said, and turned her mare. "Enter it. It'll be dead by second bell, and the ember ring will have its blood, which is what everyone came for anyway." He had come to Maren in the winter, out of the sump at the bottom of the old Cairnhold Silver Works, where the meltwater collects and freezes and collects again. She had gone down for a lost hound, and found instead a thing half-drowned in slush, jaw torn, one eye swollen shut, so cold its heart had gone slow as a dripping tap. She should have left it. A kennel warden who feeds a stray out of the king's stores can lose a finger for theft. She had carried it up 406 steps instead, and she had counted every one of them. And by the time she reached the top, her arms had stopped working, and she had made a decision she never afterward examined too closely. She called him Ash, because that was what he'd looked like coming out of the Sump. Something raked out of a dead fire. That had been 8 months ago. In that time, Ash had learned the vaunt the way a soldier learns a fortress. He knew which flagstone in the north run rocked when you stepped on it. He knew Master Fesk's cough from 3 corridors off. He knew, without being taught, to lie down flat and go blank-eyed and stupid whenever a registry man came through with a tally board, and to get up again the instant the man had gone. Maren had noticed that. She had noticed it, and then carefully, deliberately, stopped noticing it, because there are things a person in her position cannot afford to have noticed. He had never once made a sound. Not a bark, not a whine, not even in the first week when she'd had to burn the wound on his jaw closed. He had put his head in her lap and shaken, and made no sound at all, and that had frightened her more than screaming would have. There had been one other thing, in the spring, that she had put away and not looked at since. The vaunt master had been reading out the season's inspection notices to the wardens in the yard, in the flat drone of a man reading words he did not care about, and he had come to the line by order of the Chancellor and Keeper, A. Stag and Ash, lying in the sun by the wall, apparently asleep, apparently a rug with ribs, had come up off the stone so fast he took a water pail over with him. Every warden in the yard had laughed. A rat, they said. Something under the wall. Maren had put her hand on his chest to settle him, and had felt his heart going like a bird's, and she had noticed that he was not looking at the wall at all. He was looking at the master's mouth. She had told herself, rat. Because the alternative was that an animal in the king's kennels knew a name, and knowing what a beast is thinking is a very good way to end up on the same roll it is on. The king's tournament came to Cairnhold every 7th summer, and it turned the city inside out. For 3 weeks the packs of Verith poured down out of the ranges and up from the coast roads. Ironmere in their salt-stiffened greys, the Thornfield Alphas riding in ranks of 9, the small hill packs whose whole delegation might be a father, 2 sons, and a champion with borrowed boots. They came for the Ember Ring, a bowl of packed red clay ringed by 9 tiers of stone benches, where over 11 days the champions fought and wrestled and ran the stone course. And at the end of it, the Alpha King raised 1 hand over 1 head, and that pack ate well for 7 years. And around the edges of it, in the sawdust yards and the beast pits, ran the other tournament. The one for beast kind. Beast kind was a legal category before it was anything else. Maren had read the act. She'd read it standing up in the Registry antechamber, in the hour they made petitioners wait, because reading was free. An act for the quelling and ordering of unsound blood, 41 years old, 11 pages, and the whole weight of it hanging off a single clause. Any wolf who cannot take his shift when lawfully called at Assize shall be entered upon the beast-kind roll, and shall thereafter be held as chattel, and shall have no name in law. No name in law. Maren had rolled that phrase around in her mouth for years, the way you worry a chipped tooth. It meant you could not own, or testify, or marry, or be murdered, because there was no crime called murder that applied to you. It meant a collar. It meant that on the 4th day of the tournament, the beast pits filled up with the collared, and the crowd bet on which of them would still be breathing at dusk. 40 crowns for the beast trial purse. 40 crowns was Maren's indenture, bought out clean, plus enough left over to petition the Registry for a correction to a grave marker. False recorder. 4 syllables of state-cut stone. That was why she was standing in the mud with a starving dog and a straight back, letting a lord's daughter crack a whip at her boots. The enrollment clerk was a bored beta with ink to his elbows, and he had already stamped the slip and turned away when the yard went quiet a second time. This silence was different. The first one had been anticipation. This one was the kind that starts at the far end of a crowd and comes toward you like weather. Chancellor Aurelian Stagg had entered the registration yard. He was not a large man. That was the first thing everyone said about him afterward, always, as if it explained something. 60-odd, dry as a ledger, in the pewter gray of the Registry with the keeper's chain across his chest, a chain of small linked seals, one for every provincial role he held. He did not have guards exactly. He had clerks, 6 of them, and somehow that was worse. The Registry had been a clerical office once, a room with shelves, where bondings and births and pack charters were written down so that families could prove what they were. Under Stagg, it had become the thing that decided what they were. He had held it 22 years. In that time, the beast-kind roll had grown from 91 names to 4,060, and 11 pack charters had been voided for defective record. And every single one of those charters had covered land with silver or timber or a river crossing on it. Maren knew that last part because her mother had known it. Beatrix Callow had been an under-recorder of the Registry, 3rd desk, provincial. She had known a great deal at the end. Stagg passed along the enrollment line with the mild, incurious attention of a man inspecting fence posts, and Maren lowered her eyes because everyone did, and she thought that would be the end of it. His footsteps stopped. She looked up. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Ash, not at his ribs, or his ruined gait, or the patchy flank. At his throat. At the dull gray collar half buried in the fur. And at the tiny raised mark stamped into the metal where the seam should have been, which Maren had assumed for 8 months was a smith's mark, and had never once thought to wonder about. Aurelian Stagg's face did not change, but something went out of it. Some small constant motion behind the eyes that a living face always has. For 3 full breaths, he was a portrait of himself. "Handler," he said, "where did you get this animal?" "Found him, my Lord Chancellor. In the Sump at the old works, last winter. Found him." He said it without inflection. "Alive." "Barely, my lord. Barely." The Chancellor's hand rose, one finger, and a clerk came forward with the tally board like a man who had been shot from a crossbow. "Strike this entry." The board beta clerk blinked. "It's stamped, my lord." "Then unstamp it." Stagg was already turning away. "The animal is unsound stock, diseased. It will be taken up tonight and culled at dawn behind the tannery, and the carcass burned, not buried. See it recorded. See it burned." "My lord," Maren heard her own voice come out before she had decided anything. "He's sound. He runs. He's only thin. I can show you." Stagg stopped and looked at her properly for the first time, and Maren understood, with a cold and perfect clarity, that until that moment she had not existed to him at all, and that now she did, and that this was infinitely worse. "What is your name, girl?" She should have lied. Later she would lie awake and go over the 12 different lies she could have told. "Maren Callow, my lord. Of the Vaunt." Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, or something colder than recognition. It lasted less than a heartbeat. "Callow," said the Chancellor of Verith, keeper of the Registry, and smiled with the lower half of his face. "Of course it is." He walked on. They came for Ash at the 10th bell, but by then Maren had already moved him. She did it the way she did everything, which was quietly, and about an hour before anyone expected it. She'd taken him out through the sick run, the low stone gallery where the Vaunt keeps beasts with the coughing sickness and nobody with a choice ever goes, and she'd made a nest of old straw behind the lime barrels, and she sat with her back against cold stone, and Ash's head heavy across her thigh. And she listened to Stagg's men kick through the kennel 2 floors above. She was shaking. She let herself shake. There was no one to see. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Before light. There's a wool road out the eastern gate. The drovers go before dawn and they don't count what walks behind the carts. We get you north past the range. There's nothing north of the range. Nobody counts anything up there. Ash didn't move. You'll hate it. Snow, 4 months a year. Her fingers found the collar, as they always did, and worked underneath it to scratch the raw skin where the fur had gone. I looked for a keyway again. There isn't one. There's no seam and no hinge, and it isn't welded, Ash. It's cast. Someone cast it around your neck. Do you understand what that means? Someone had to hold you still while it cooled. The lime barrels ticked in the dark. With her other hand, without thinking, she took hold of the thing at her own throat. It was not jewelry. It was a disc of hard old sealing wax the size of a thumbnail, cracked across one corner, mounted crudely in a twist of copper wire, worn shiny with 11 years of handling. Her mother had pressed it into her palm on the last morning, in the yard at Stonewater, with the registry men waiting at the gate, and had said 8 words, and then gone with them. Keep it. Don't show it. It's the true one. Maren had been 8. She had never known what it meant, and there was nobody left alive to ask, and the mark stamped into the wax was worn nearly smooth. A crest of some kind, a ring of thorns, a wolf's head, and a set of numbers she had traced with her thumbnail 10,000 times. Both of us with something round the neck, she said. Aren't we a pair? And that was when Ash lifted his head off her leg. He did it fast, faster than he had moved in 8 months, faster than a thing that starved should be able to move. His ears went flat. His body came up under him, all of it at once, and every hair along his spine stood, and he was staring past her at the black mouth of the sick run where the gallery bent away toward the yard. Maren heard it a half-second later. Boots on stone, several. Coming slow, which was worse than coming fast, because coming slow meant they knew exactly where they were going. She got her hand around his muzzle. Down, she breathed. Down, down, please. And in the dark, against her palm, with a throat that had not made a sound in 8 months, the animal said, Run! She ran, not because she had decided anything. Her legs simply went, hauling her up off the straw with the lead wrapped twice around her fist and Ash already moving under her hand, and the two of them went down the sick run in the dark like water finding a crack. Behind them, a lantern swung into the gallery mouth and a voice said there, and then there was no more thinking, only the count of her own feet on wet stone. Left at the lime store, down 11 steps, through the drain arch where the runoff from the upper kennels came out, ankle deep and stinking, and out into the black slot between the vaunt's outer wall and the retaining bank, a gap so narrow that a grown man in mail could not follow. A grown man in mail did try. She heard him swear, and then heard him give up. They came out 400 paces on, at the bottom of the tannery lane, and Maren stood bent over with her hands on her knees, breathing like a bellows, and looked at the animal beside her. Say it again, she said. Ash looked up at her, amber eyes, reading her. You said run. You said a word. Say it again. He opened his mouth. What came out was a sound like a door dragging over gravel, air with a shape almost in it, and no voice behind it at all. He tried a second time, and a third, and on the third, his whole body flinched with the effort, and a thin line of blood came out of the corner of his mouth. Stop. Maren was down on her knees in the muck with both hands on his jaw. Stop, stop. Don't. Never mind. I heard you. I heard you. And then, because there was nowhere else in Cairnhold to go, she took him to the old man. Elian Fesk lived above a rope walk in the undercliff, and had lived there for 19 years, which was exactly as long as it had been since the court had thrown him out. He'd been wolf reader to the crown before that. An office nobody could quite define, half naturalist and half priest, whose holder was expected to know what wolves did and why. Fesk had held it for 30 years, and had done something unforgivable with it. He had gone and looked. Sit down before you fall down, he said, when Maren came up the ladder with a starving beast slung across her shoulders like a stole. He did not ask what she was doing there. He was 81, arthritic. and entirely done with being surprised. There's broth. It's 4 days old and it's mostly bones, which is what he wants anyway. Put him by the stove. The room was one room. Books to the ceiling on 3 walls, most of them his own. The great ruined stacks of the field observations, 31 years of them, written in a hand that got smaller as the paper got dearer. Skulls on the 4th wall. A drawing table under the window with a half-finished plate of a wolf's forelimb, articulated. Beautiful. Fesk knelt at the stove. It took him a long time, and he did it in stages, and put his hands on ash and went very quiet. Where did you find this? The Sump at the Silver Works. Last winter. No. Fesk turned the animal's head gently toward the lamp. That's where you picked him up. That's not where he was found. He drew the pad of his thumb along the underside of the jaw, over the ridge of an old break. This was set. Badly, but it was set. Someone splinted this and it healed against a splint. Beasts don't get splinted. And look here. His feet. His hands, girl. The old man said it flatly. Look at the toes. Look at the way the second and third want to move together. That is a hand that has been a paw for a very long time, and has forgotten it was ever anything else. And it has forgotten badly, which is why he limps. He sat back on his heels. How long have you had him? 8 months. And in 8 months you never once asked yourself why a beast on the roll was rotting at the bottom of a mine instead of hauling ore in a crown yard where the Registry could count him twice a year. Maren opened her mouth and shut it. No, Fesk said, not unkindly. You didn't, because you're 19 and indentured, and you know what happens to people who ask. That's not stupidity, that's survival, and I'd not have you confuse the two. He put out a hand. Help me up, and then bring the lamp close, because I want to look at that collar, and I'd rather do it before I lose my nerve. The collar was cast iron sleeved over something paler that showed at the wear points, and the pale metal had the sick greenish sheen Maren had only ever seen on registry seals. Hemlock Silver, Fesk said. An alloy. They melt down soft silver with the ash of certain roots and something else they won't write down, and the result does one thing very well. It sits against the skin, and it puts the shift to sleep. A wolf in a hemlock collar cannot take his second shape. Cannot, not will not. It's not obedience. It's amputation. And his voice? That's the throat, and the throat is the collar too. It sits over the voice box. He tapped, very lightly. 11 years of that? The muscles have wasted. He may get some of it back. He'll never get all of it. Fesk's mouth thinned. Which is convenient, when you consider it. A creature that cannot shift cannot prove he is a person. A creature that cannot speak cannot say so. Ash lay still under the old man's hands and let himself be turned. He had eaten, properly, for once, all of it. And there was something different in him tonight. He was not cowering. He was listening, chin flat on the boards, eyes going from face to face. And Maren had the increasingly uncomfortable sense that he was following the conversation better than she was. Master Fesk, why did the Chancellor look at his collar and go white? Ah, said Fesk. Now that is the only question in the room. He held the lamp close and turned the metal, hunting, and stopped. Because of this. Where a buckle should have been, a raised stamp, no bigger than a thumbnail, a wolf's head inside a ring of thorns. That's the king's own die, Fesk said quietly. Not the Registry's provincial mark, not a smith's stamp, the crown seal. Do you understand? This collar was not put on by a poacher or a slaver or some hill lord with a grudge. Somebody made this in a crown foundry, under warrant, with the king's authority, and the whole thing was written down in a ledger somewhere. Because that is the one thing that office does perfectly. They write it down. He turned the collar a fraction further. And there's a number. Maren leaned in. Beneath the seal, so worn it was more shadow than shape, R0001A. Not 1, Fesk said. First of its series, the very first collar ever struck under the Quelling Act. He set the lamp down. His hand was not entirely steady. Girl, do you have the faintest idea what you've been feeding kitchen scraps for 8 months? She did not sleep. She sat with her back against Fesk's book wall while the old man snored and the stove ticked itself cold, and she got out the disc of wax on its twist of copper wire and turned it in the light. She had done this 1,000 times, and had never once had a reason to do it. Now she had one. Now she had a thing to compare it to. Maren crossed the room on her knees, wax in one hand, and held it up beside the collar at Ash's throat. The same wolf's head, the same ring of thorns, the same nick out of the 11th thorn, where the die had chipped. Not similar. The same. Struck from the same iron. Ash, she said. Her voice had gone strange. Ash, wake up. He was already awake. He had been watching her for some time. My mother gave me this the morning they took her. She held the wax flat on her palm. She was a registry clerk, 3rd desk. She said it's the true one. And I never knew what she meant. And now... She stopped. This is a counterfoil, isn't it? A twin slip. When the registry writes a warrant, they press the seal twice. Once on the warrant and once on the twin. And the twin stays in the office so nobody can alter the warrant later without it showing. My mother stole a twin slip. Ash pushed himself up onto his forelegs. Then he did something that Maren would remember afterward, for the rest of her life, in the same drawer of memory where she kept her mother's face. He put out his right forepaw and dragged it through the drift of ash and stove grit on the boards, and wrote. It was terrible writing. It took him a long time. The long toes shook, and he had to brace his shoulder against the floor. But it was writing, in the round crown hand they teach in noble schoolrooms and nowhere else. And it said, "She hid it for me." The room made no sound at all. Maren sat back on her heels. Her ears were roaring. You knew her. The paw moved again, slower. I was 11. You were 11? She said run to. There was a great deal she wanted to ask, and no good way to ask it, because the alphabet in the stove grit could only hold 6 or 7 letters before the drift ran out and had to be swept smooth again with the side of his foreleg, and because every third question made him lie down and turn his face to the wall. So she asked the small ones. Did she look afraid? My mother, when you knew her. No. Was she kind? A long pause. Then, she read it to me. Read what to you? But the drift had run out, and he swept it, and his shoulders were shaking, and Maren said, all right, that's enough for tonight, and sat down on the boards with her back against his and let the stove go cold. She thought about her mother going down into somewhere with a lamp and reading a document aloud to a child in a cage, because that was the only thing a clerk could do. Because a clerk's whole art is that the words are the words, and somebody ought to hear them said properly. It struck her that she had spent 11 years thinking of her mother's death as something that had happened to Maren Callow. It had not. It had happened to a woman who had made a choice at a set of bars, alone, with a lamp, and had then gone back up the stairs and stolen a thing the size of a thumbnail, and had known exactly what it would cost. I'm sorry, Maren said to the dark. I've been so angry with you. She got out of Fesk's rooms an hour before dawn, because she had to. Missing one night's duty at the Vaunt was a whipping. Missing 2 was a lengthening of indenture, and a lengthened indenture was a lifetime. So Maren Callow scrubbed kennels through the 4th day of the King's tournament with her hands in lie and her head full of I was 11, and heard the ember ring roar 4 times through the wall, and went out at midday to the water trough, where the whole city gathered to hear the herald's board read out, and stood at the back with her hood up. The herald read the tournament results first. Thornfield's champion had broken a man's arm in the wrestling. Ironmere had withdrawn. Then he read the Assize notices, and the yard's noise dropped off. By order of the Chancellor and Keeper of the Registry, sitting for the crown, the herald called, upon the closing day of the tournament, The beast-kind roll of the capital shall be retired in whole. All beast-kind held within the walls, being chattel of the crown or of private hand, shall be delivered to the Assize yard for retirement. Compensation to lawful owners at 4 crowns the head. Failure to deliver, concealment of a beast, is theft from the crown, and shall carry the full pain of theft. Retired, said a man near Maren. To nobody. That means killed, doesn't it? 4,000 of them, said someone else. It's 4,000. They can't. They can. It's written down. Maren stood in the crush with her hood up and thought, very clearly and coldly. He saw the number on that collar, and he cannot cull one animal quietly now. So he will cull 4,000, and nobody will ever be able to point at which one mattered. She was still standing there when a hand closed on her upper arm. Kennel girl, said Isolde Stag, you and I are going to have a conversation, and you are going to be extremely careful about how you lie to me. She took Maren up onto the tourney scaffolding, of all places, the empty timber ranks behind the ember ring where the carpenters ate, 40 feet up, wind coming through the struts. Nobody could come up without being seen. Maren noticed that Isolde had chosen it for exactly that reason, and revised several opinions. My father is frightened, Isolde said, without preamble. She had stripped off her riding gloves and was turning them over in her hands. I have known Aurelian Stag for 23 years. I have watched him sign away 11 pack charters and read the objections aloud in the voice he uses for the weather. I have never once seen the man frightened. Yesterday he came back from the enrollment yard and he did not eat, and he did not sleep, and at the 3rd bell he had 4 clerks pulling provincial rolls out of the deep archive. She looked up. So, what is that animal? He's a beast off the roll, my lady. Like 4,000 others, apparently. Don't. Isolde's jaw moved. Don't be clever at me. I don't have the temperament for it, and we don't have the time. Why do you care? Because I am to be married in the autumn, Isolde said, to a man I have met 3 times, in a bonding my father negotiated when I was 14 years old, and entered into the registry when I was 15, and I have recently come to understand something about how those entries are made. She said it evenly, the way people say things they have practiced saying evenly. My mother died when I was 6. Everyone at court says she wasted. I found her physician's account book in a box of my father's papers when I was 19, and there is no wasting in it. There are 11 years of a woman being given something to keep her quiet, and the account is settled by the registry, and the last entry is 3 weeks before a bond transfer that carries her seal and not her hand. She looked out over the empty red bowl of the ember ring. So when I ask what that animal is, Kennel Girl, I am not asking on my father's behalf. Do you understand me? I have spent 4 years looking for one single thing in this world that would stand up in a tribunal, and I have never found it. And yesterday, my father went white at the throat of a starving dog. Maren stood in the wind on the scaffolding and thought about how many ways this could be a trap, and counted 6, and found that she did not care about any of them. He can write, she said. The dog. He writes crown hand. Isolde Stag turned and looked at her, and for a moment she was not a lord's daughter at all, just a young woman with all the blood gone out of her face. Crown hand, she said. They only teach that in one schoolroom in Verith. I know. They teach it in the schoolroom at the Ash Court, to the king's own children. Isolde's hands had gone still on the gloves. Kennel Girl, the king has 1 living son. He had 2. Below them, 4 floors down, the great gate of the ember ring boomed open, and the crowd sound came up the scaffolding like heat off a fire, and neither of them heard the timber creak behind them until the Chancellor's clerk said pleasantly, My lady, your father wants you, and he wants the girl. The Chancellor did not have her beaten. Maren had braced for beating. What he did instead was worse, because it was reasonable. They put her in a chair. There was a fire. There was, absurdly, tea. "You are Beatrix Callow's daughter," Aurelian Stagg said, arranging his papers. "I knew her. Third desk, provincial rolls, a meticulous woman. She had a mind like a good lock." He looked up. "She stole from this office and she was hanged for it, and I want you to understand that I took no pleasure in that. It was a waste of an excellent clerk. She wasn't a false recorder." "No," Stagg agreed, "she was not." And Maren's whole body went cold, because he said it the way a man says the window is open. She recorded perfectly. That was the difficulty. He set down a slip of paper and turned it toward her. "Your indenture. 14 crowns and 11, with 3 years and 4 months outstanding. Signed by a vauntmaster who I doubt could read it." "My lord." "And this," he said, laying a second sheet beside the first, "is a registry correction order. It requires 2 seals and a keeper's hand. It would strike the words false recorder from the roll of the condemned and from any stone bearing them, and it would enter the correction in the permanent record, where it could never afterward be undone by me or by anyone who comes after me." He folded his hands. "I will sign both. Tonight, in front of witnesses of your choosing." The fire popped. Maren sat very still and understood that this was the most dangerous moment of her life. "For the animal," she said. "For the animal." Stagg's face was mild. "Which you cannot keep, which will be retired in 6 days with 4,000 others whether you weep about it or not. You are not being asked to sacrifice anything, Miss Callow. You are being offered payment for a thing you are about to lose regardless. That is not corruption. That is mercy, and mercy is the only currency this office has ever really dealt in. And the terrible thing, the thing that Maren would be ashamed of for years, and would eventually stop being ashamed of, because Fesk told her not to be, was that she thought about it. She thought about her mother's stone with 4 syllables cut into it. Then she thought about a paw dragging through stove grit. She hid it for me." "No," she said. Stagg looked at her for a long moment. Then he gathered both papers back into his stack, evenly, and squared the edges. And Maren saw that he had expected this, and had made the offer anyway, because a man who keeps records likes to be able to write down that the offer was made. "Then you are charged with concealment of crown chattel," he said, "which is theft, and theft from the crown carries the collar. Do you know that? I don't imagine you've read that far into the act." He rang a small bell. "It has the advantage of symmetry. They put her in the Assize holding, and at the second bell of the night, Isolde Stagg came down the stairs with a key she should not have had, and a lantern turned low. 'Listen to me and don't talk,' she said. 'He has the animal. His men took it out of the rope walk 2 hours ago. The old man is alive. They only broke the door. And it is in a stone box under the ember ring with a chain on it. And he is not going to cull it behind a tannery.' Then what? He's opened the closing right." Isolde's voice was flat and fast. "The King's Quarry. It's older than the tournament, the last day. A beast is loosed in the ember ring, and the crown's champion runs it down before the packs, and the blood goes on the clay, and everyone goes home fed on it. It hasn't been done in 40 years because it's barbaric, and my father has always said so in exactly those words." She let out a breath. "He announced it an hour ago. 9 tiers, 11,000 witnesses, the king himself on the rail. That animal is going to die in front of the entire kingdom in a rite so old that nobody can object to it, and it will be legal, and afterward nobody will ever be able to say which beast it was, because it will simply be the quarry." Maren gripped the bars. "Who's the champion?" Isolde's mouth twisted. "Guess. You." He put my name forward before he told me, in front of the king, in front of the marshal. She laughed once, with no humor in it at all. "So you see, if I refuse, I am my mother, being quietly medicated in a room somewhere, and if I don't refuse, I am my father." "Or," Maren said, "you let me out." "Yes," said Isolde Stag. "That's why I'm here." Fesk had a broken door, a cut over his eye, and every book in the room on the floor, and he did not seem to have noticed any of it. He was at the drawing table with the lamp pulled down close. "I have thought about nothing else since they took him," he said. "Sit. No, don't sit, there's no time, stand there and listen. You cannot cut Hemlock Silver. Understand that first, because you are about to waste the only chance either of you gets on a chisel. It doesn't cut. It doesn't file. It doesn't take a blow. It's soft. It dents. That's why they use it. Then it can't be got off. I said it can't be cut." Fesk turned the plate toward her, and she saw he'd drawn the collar from memory, sectioned. "But an alloy has a temper, girl, and Hemlock Silver is annealed slow because otherwise the ash fraction crazes. I have watched it poured. I watched it poured in the Crown Foundry 41 years ago, when I was still a man they led into rooms. And I saw an apprentice quench a cast one early, and I saw what happened." His finger tapped the plate. It went to glass. He picked it up, and it came apart in his hands like a dropped cup. Maren's breath went out of her. "Heat it, then water. Hot enough to glow dull, and then cold, and it must be sudden. A bucket, a butt, a trough, in one motion." Fesk's eyes were wet, and he was smiling like a lunatic. "The Ember Ring has fire trenches at the north hoardings for the brands and the beast irons. It has water butts at the south for the hounds. There is 50 feet of open clay between them, and 11,000 people will be watching every inch of it. And he has a chain on him and a spear behind him." "Yes," said Ilian Fesk. "It's a terrible plan. It's the only one." He turned in his chair and looked at her, and the lunatic smile went away. "Maren, if it works, you will not be freeing a beast. Do you understand what walks out of that? Because I do. I have spent 31 years being laughed at by men in good coats, and I have never once been wrong about a wolf, and I am not wrong now. Say it anyway." "They took the whole of a person," Fesk said, "and they wrote animal on him, and every day for 11 years he had to be careful not to be caught knowing anything." He struck the table once, softly. "And they did it on the strength of an argument I have spent 31 years proving false to men who would not sit still long enough to hear it. Get him out of that ring alive, girl, and I will make them sit still. I have earned that much." The 11th day came up hot and cloudless, and by the 4th bell the Ember Ring held 11,000 and turned them into one animal. Maren went in with the beast handler's detail because Isolde had put her name on the detail slip in a hand that was almost her father's, and she stood in the north hoarding with a hook pole she did not know how to use, and watched the fire trench glow 4 feet away, and made herself breathe. The Alpha King was brought out at the 5th bell. Halden Marrow had been a big man once. You could still see the frame of it under the robes, the way you can see the shape of a barn in a fallen roof. They carried him to the rail in a chair, and he sat with his hands on the arms of it and his head at an angle that took effort, and 11,000 wolves stood up and roared for him, and Maren, 40 feet away, watched him fail to lift his hand more than halfway. Behind his chair, at his shoulder, stood Aurelian Stag with a folded document in his hand. Then they brought out the quarry. They dragged him, 2 men on a pole chain, and he came out into the light, half-crouched with his ruined jaw open and his ribs like a broken ladder. And the great bowl of the Ember Ring saw what it had been promised and made a sound Maren felt in her spine. Not anger, disappointment. 11,000 people looking at a starving dog and feeling cheated. That's the quarry? That's a tannery dog. And somewhere in the 3rd tier, clear as a bell in a lull, "That's your pet." And laughter went round the bowl, the same laughter as in the mud of the registration yard, 11,000 times bigger. Ash stood in the middle of the red clay and turned, slowly, and found Maren in the hoarding. She lifted the hook pole. Once. To the left. 50 feet of clay. The fire trench at her back. He came at her like something fired out of a bow. The two chainmen had never in their lives held a beast that ran at the crowd, and the pole went out of one man's hands entirely, and took the second one off his feet, and then there was a starving animal loose on the clay of the Ember Ring, going flat out for the north hoarding, and the sound the bull made then was enormous and joyful and entirely without mercy. "Champion!" the marshal bellowed. "Champion to the quarry!" Isolde's stag came off the crown's block with a boar spear in her hands. She was fast. Maren had not understood how fast. 3 strides, and she was inside the arc, and she came down the line of the running animal with the spear low and level, and 11,000 people screaming for it. And at the last instant, Isolde's stag turned her wrist and put the spearhead into the clay. It went in a foot deep. She let it go and let herself fall over it, hard, and rolled, and came up on her knees with her hands empty and her face lifted to the Chancellor's box in a way that could not possibly be mistaken for an accident. Maren was already moving. She got the hook pole into the beast iron ring at the fire trench and hauled, and the brazier tipped, and 40 pounds of glowing coal and burning brand irons went out across the clay in a spreading orange rope, and ash ran through it. He screamed. There was no voice in it, and it was still the worst thing Maren had ever heard. He went through fire to the depth of his knees and came out the other side smoking, with the collar at his throat gone from dull gray to a sullen, breathing red, and he did not stop, because she was running too, 40 feet ahead of him, straight down the open clay toward the south hoarding and the water butts. 50 feet. 40. The bull had gone strange. The screaming had changed pitch, because a crowd knows when it is watching something it does not have a name for. Maren hit the butt with her shoulder, and her hip and both hands under the rim, and she felt something tear across her back, and she did not care at all, and 300 pounds of water and oak went over. It caught him mid-stride. The sound was not loud. Afterward, everyone remembered it as loud, but it wasn't. It was a small dry tick, like a stone in a fire, and it happened in the half-second while the water was still in the air. Then the collar came apart. It did not break in two. It went to pieces. 100 pieces. 1,000. Gray-green splinters flying out from his throat in a ring and skittering away across the wet clay in every direction. And the water hit him, and he went down, and rolled, and steam came up off him in a white wall, and for 3 full seconds the center of the ember ring was nothing but a rolling cloud with a shape thrashing inside it. 11,000 people stood up, and the shape in the steam stood up too. He came up on 2 legs. Not a wolf. Everyone in that bowl had come to see a beast take its true shape, and every one of them had assumed they knew what that meant. And what stood up out of the steam on the red clay of the ember ring was a man, a young man, 22 or 23, naked and burned, and so thin that the light seemed to go through him, black hair to his shoulders, hands held out from his sides with the fingers spread and shaking as though he did not trust them. He was weeping. He made no sound doing it. He had not made a sound in 11 years. And around his throat, in a clean band where the collar had sat, the skin was white and hairless and shining, and burned into it just under the jaw, old, deep, deliberate, was a brand. A wolf's head inside a ring of thorns. Somewhere in the second tier a woman began to scream, and it was not fear. It was the sound people make at a grave, because they were all looking at his face. 11,000 of them, and then the ones behind them, standing on the benches to see, looking at his face, and then turning, as one animal, as one enormous single creature, to look at the ruined old man in the chair at the rail. The same brow, the same wide-set eyes, the same long jaw, broken and badly set, but the same. "Corrin," said the Alpha King. He said it quietly. He was not a loud man anymore. But the ember ring had gone so silent that it went all the way to the 9th tier and came back. "Corrin, Corrin, they said you drowned." And Aurelian's stag stepped forward to the rail and unfolded the document in his hand, and his voice, when it came, was the voice he used for the weather. "Marshal, note the hour." He held the parchment up so the seals hung and swung, 3 of them, red as berries. The crowd has this day witnessed a creature entered upon the beast-kind roll take the shape of a man. Under the Act of Quelling, Clause 11. A beast that assumes man form is not a man restored, but a corruption of blood, and shall be destroyed before the dusk of the same day, and no plea shall stand for it. He turned, unhurried, and looked down at the boy standing naked and steaming in the middle of the red clay. It is very sad. It is also the law, and the law has been read in this ring since before any of us were born. That is my son, the king said, and got half out of his chair, and could not. That, said Stagg gently, is a beast, your majesty. It has been a beast in law for 11 years, and it has been a beast. He lifted the parchment higher, and the great seal at its foot swung out where the front tiers could see the wolf's head and the ring of thorns. By your own warrant, your hand, your die, sealed at the Ash Court in the 11th month of the 49th year, and entered, and never once revoked. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed on the ears. The Alpha King of Verith looked at the parchment. He looked at his son. His mouth moved twice before anything came out of it. I signed it, he said. I signed it, the Alpha King said again. I signed a mercy. Nobody moved. He had the wasting fever, 11 years old. Halden Marrow's hands had begun to shake on the arms of the chair, and he did not seem to know it. They brought me a warrant of quarantine at the 3rd bell of the night, and my keeper stood where he is standing now and told me the boy would not last the week, and that I should sign and go and sit with my son. His head came up, and I signed, and in the morning they told me he had gone into the river. Your Majesty is unwell, said Aurelian Stagg. I signed a quarantine. Your Majesty signed this. It is a difficult thing to look at one's own hand after 11 years. Memory is a mercy of its own. The Chancellor did not raise his voice by a hair. Marshal, the hour. And Maren Callow, barefoot, soaked, standing in a spreading puddle on the clay in front of 11,000 people, heard her own voice come out of her chest like something thrown. Then read the twin. The bowl turned. All of it. She had never in her life wanted so badly to be small. Every warrant is struck twice, she shouted, and her voice cracked and she kept going. Once on the warrant, and once on the twin slip, and the twin holds the clerk's abstract sealed under the wax so nobody can go back afterward and put new words under an old seal. That is the whole reason it exists. She got the copper wire over her head and held the little cracked disc up in her fist. Are not one. My mother took it out of the deep archive the night she was arrested, and you hanged her as a false recorder because you could not afford to say what she had really done. It has been round my neck for 11 years. Break it open. Break it open in front of the packs. Silence. Then, from the Crown's block, Isolde Stagg, on her feet, still muddy, spearless, said in a voice pitched to reach the 9th tier, I lay information against the keeper of the Registry. Her father turned his head. It was the first time in Maren's life she ever saw the man look surprised. On my own oath and my own name, Isolde said, and I ask the Marshal to convene the Assize where it stands. There are 11,000 witnesses out there. We will not get better ones. They held it there. That was Halden Marrow's last real act as king, and there are people in Verith who will tell you it was the only good one. He put his hand on the rail and said, Convene. They set a table on the clay. 9 tiers of packs sat down again in the heat and did not leave, and did not eat, and hardly spoke, for 5.5 hours. Somebody put a horse blanket around Corrin Marrow's shoulders. He sat on an overturned water butt with his burned feet in a basin, and did not take his eyes off the table for 1 minute of it. The Marshal of the Ring was a plain old alpha named Dunmore, who had spent 30 years enforcing rules about spear lengths, and had no particular love for anybody. He opened by objecting to the whole thing. Under the Act, he said, A beast on the roll has no name in law. It cannot plead, cannot testify, cannot be a party. If that clause holds, there is nothing here to try, and we're all going home." "Then let us try the clause," said Isolde. They broke the wax with a bone knife on the table in front of 4 witnesses and a scribe, and the whole bowl leaned forward to watch 2 people fumble with a thing the size of a thumbnail. Under 11 years of hard old sealing wax, there was a scrap of registry linen paper, folded twice, foxed brown at the creases but perfectly legible, in a small tight clerk's hand that Maren had not seen since she was 8 years old, and which put her on her knees in the clay before she knew she was falling. The scribe read it out. He had to do it 3 times before the tears stopped shouting. R0001A. Warrant of Quarantine and Mercy. Subject: Corrin Vale Marrow, Prince, 2nd of that name, aged 11, 1 Rs. Cause: wasting fever. Contagion feared. Term: to be held apart from the court, with physician, until recovery or death. Warrant lapses upon recovery. Struck this 11th month, 49th year. Recorded: B. Callow, under Recaurg. 3rd desk. Warrant lapses upon recovery. "There is no collar in it," the scribe said, into the noise, holding up the little brown scrap. "There is no roll in it. There is no word beast anywhere in this instrument." Marshal Dunmore turned the great sealed parchment over and studied the foot of it for a long time. "This has been re-engrossed," he said. "The seal is older than the ink. Look at the strike line. The wax went on before the last 4 lines were written, and you can see where the pen has run round the wax instead of under it." He set it down. "Someone signed a mercy. Someone else wrote a sentence beneath it afterward." Aurelian Stagg did not shout, or bluster, or run. He stood at the table with his hands folded and defended himself for 2 hours, and it was, everyone agreed later, an extraordinary performance. He said the boy had genuinely fallen ill, and that in the fever his shift had failed. That he had gone into wolf shape and been unable to come out of it. A thing that happens perhaps once in a generation, and is called the sticking. That was true. And Fesk confirmed it, unwillingly from the witness table. He said a prince who could not take man shape could not be a prince. The 2nd clause of the succession says so, and that the realm had stood 11 days from war with the Thornfield Pax, and that he had done what a keeper must do, which is write down what is true rather than what is comfortable. I entered him upon the roll, because on the 11th night of the 11th month, that is what he was. Every step was lawful. Every step is written down. I have never in 22 years done one single thing that was not written down. And when he recovered, said Isolde. Her father looked at her. He recovered, Chancellor. The warrant lapses upon recovery. You read it aloud to the king yourself, or a clerk did, because that is what the instrument said. When did he come out of the sticking? A month? A year? 4 months, said a voice. It was not much of a voice. It came out low and torn, 1 word at a time, with a long breath between each, and the ember ring went so quiet that 11,000 people heard every syllable of it. Corrin Marrow had stood up. 4 months, he said again. Foundry. Under. The ash court. He touched the white band at his throat. They. Cast it. On me. Twice. A breath. First one. Was too big. I grew, Marshal Dunmore said very carefully. The act says a beast may not testify. He is not a beast, said Maren. He was never lawfully on the roll for 1 hour. The warrant lapsed at his recovery, and everything after it was a forgery. You cannot silence him with a status he never had. Dunmore chewed on that for a while. No, he said at last. I don't believe you can. Let him speak. It took Corrin 40 minutes to say what a healthy man could have said in 5, and nobody in that bowl moved for 1 second of it. He said they had kept him under the foundry 4 years, and in a northern ore yard for 6, and that the yardmaster had been kind, and had taught him to write in the dust, because it amused him that the animal could. He said a clerk came twice a year to count. He said that last winter the yard flooded, the stock was moved south for sale, a chain broke on a mountain road, and he had gone down 400 feet of scree into the water and had not tried very hard to come out. He said that when he was 11, a woman from the third desk had come down to the foundry, alone, at night, with a lamp, and had knelt at the bars and read him the warrant. She said, it lapsed. His hands were shaking. He held them still against his knees. She said, I'm sorry. I have to leave you here. But I will. Take the true one. Out. He looked for the first time at Maren. She said, if I ever get out, look for a girl with wax round her neck. Maren put both hands over her mouth. So, said Isolde Stag standing, let us come to why. And she put the black roll on the table. It was not black. It was a registry master ledger bound in green board, 11 inches thick, and it had taken her 4 years to learn it existed, and 11 minutes that morning to steal it, because her father had never once imagined his daughter might be a thief. 4,060 names on the roll, she said, opening it. This morning I did what nobody has bothered to do, which is read the margins. Every collaring carries a cross-reference. 3,000 crossed to nothing. Stuck wolves, the genuinely ill. And 940 of them. She walked the ledger along the front tier so the packs could see the columns. Crossed to a forfeiture. A collared man cannot hold land, my lords. He cannot sign, cannot inherit, cannot object. 940 collars, 11 voided charters, and every parcel bought at auction by a syndicate whose warrants of agency are in the back of this book in my father's own hand. She stopped in front of the Chancellor. Stonewater, she said. River crossing and 11 miles of silver-bearing rock, voided for defect of record 4 days after the under-recorder of the third desk was arrested. She turned a page. And here, on the 4th leaf, an instrument of bond transfer dated the 9th month of the 38th year, carrying my mother's seal and not her hand, and witnessed by a physician whose accounts are settled out of registry funds for the following 11 years. The ember ring made a low sound, the sound of a very large animal beginning to be angry. You have read the margins, her father said quietly, and you have understood nothing. Every one of those instruments is lawful. Yes, said Isolde. That's the case against you. It was Ilian Fesk who finished it, and he did it sitting down, because his legs would not hold him. 81 years old, a cut over his eye, his life's work in a satchel, and 19 years of waiting for somebody to make him say it in a room where it counted. The act rests on a doctrine, he said, not on the collar, on the doctrine, and the doctrine is 1 sentence long. That the wolf, left to himself, is a tyranny. That blood without the man in it makes alphas and betas, and the strong eat first, and therefore that unsound blood must be held as chattel for its own good and everyone else's. Every lord in this ring has said it. It is in the preamble. Read the preamble. We've read it, said Dunmore. Then read the footnote, said Fesk, because I have. It cites 11 years of observation taken at the Royal Menagerie, and the Royal Menagerie was a stone pen 40 feet across, in which unrelated adult wolves out of 6 different ranges were penned together and fed from one trough. He held up a shaking finger. That is not a pack. That is a prison. Put strangers in a box and starve them slightly, and they will invent a tyranny by the 3rd week. So will men. We have all seen it. And none of us call it human nature. I spent 9 winters lying in the snow above the Marrow range, watching wolves who were not in a box. There are no alphas out there, my lords. There is a mother, a father, and their children. The young go out at 3 years and make families of their own. And the endless fighting for rank that this act calls the natural order of blood does not happen at all, because a family does not need a tyrant to decide who eats. He put the satchel on the table. 31 years, dates, ranges, sightings. Everyone witnessed and countersigned by a herdsman or a warden who can be called into this ring today. The doctrine in your preamble is not a fact about wolves. It is a fact about enclosures. And we collared 4,000 people on the strength of it. Marshal Dunmore looked at the satchel for a long moment. "Why," he said, "was this never brought before the Assize?" "It was," said Fesk. "In the 62nd year, it was refused as unsound, and the man who brought it lost his office." He smiled with no teeth in it at all. "Guess who held the register of petitions? They did not hang Aurelian's stag. Corrin would not have it, and by then, though nothing had been said and nothing signed, the ring had begun in the peculiar way of crowds to ask what Corrin would have. "Collar him!" somebody shouted from the 4th tier. And 11,000 voices took it up and sent it round the bowl twice. "Collar him! Collar him!" The young man on the water butt stood and waited, and the noise took a long time to die. "No," he said, one word at a time, into the quiet. "There will be. No more. Collars. Not for him. A breath. Especially. Not for him." He was stripped of the keeper's chain there on the clay, tried over 4 months with counsel and record, and convicted on 209 counts of false engrossment and 1 of forging a crown warrant. He died in a cell in his 8th year, still writing appeals in a beautiful clerk's hand. And every one of them was entered into the record, at his own insistence, because he had always believed that everything must be written down. The Quelling Act was not repealed that day. That is the part people leave out, and Maren always put it back in. It took 14 months, 2 assizes, and a great deal of extremely boring work by a committee of clerks. But the beastkind roll was dissolved by the marshal's order before sundown, and the smiths worked 9 days straight in the assize yard, and at the end of it, there were 4,059 people in Cairnhold, with white bands round their throats, and no names in law, and the registry had to invent an entirely new instrument for giving them back. They called it a restoration, and it required 3 things, and those 3 things were the whole reform in miniature: the subject's own mark, in the subject's own hand, a witness from outside the registry, and the entry read aloud to the person it concerned, in words they understood, before the seal went on. Nothing about anyone, ever again, without them in the room. Halden Marrow abdicated in the spring. He lived another 1.5 years, and his son sat with him most evenings, and what passed between them was nobody's business, and Maren never asked. Corrin did not take the crown for 11 months. "Not until," he told the marshal, "the thing is answerable." He had a wax tablet by then, for the long sentences, and he wrote, "A king who can sign a mercy at the 3rd bell of the night and never be asked about it again is exactly how this happened. Bind the throne first, then give it to me." So they wrote the charter of the 9th tier, named for where the poorest packs sit in the Ember ring, and its first clause says that no instrument of the crown affecting the status of a person has force unless that person was present, or represented, and heard. He was crowned under it the following summer, in the ring, with the white band showing above his collar, because he refused to have it covered. The bond had come the moment the collar shattered, a wrench, an unhooking, the sudden appalling awareness of another person's heartbeat in her own chest, arriving in the middle of the worst 5 minutes of her life. 11 years of Hemlock Silver had sat on it. It came off the way a spring comes off. She did not mention it. Neither did he. It sat between them through the tribunal and the smith's yard, and 14 months of committee work like a chair nobody would sit in. It was Corrin who finally said it, in the autumn, in Fesk's rooms above the rope walk, with the old man asleep and snoring in his chair and the stove ticking. "I felt it," he said, "in the ring. I know. I want to say something, badly." He had more voice by then, though it would always sound like a door over gravel, and it always tired him. So listen, because it takes me a while. She listened. For 11 years, Corrin Marrow said, every single thing about me was decided by people who did not ask my name, my status, whether I was a person, a breath, all of it, written down, about me, without me. He looked at her, and now there is a thing, in my blood, telling me that you are mine. His hands closed. I will not have one more thing, decided about me, in a language I did not agree to speak, and I will not have you, handed to me by my own body, the way they handed Stonewater to a syndicate. Maren's eyes were streaming, and she did not bother about it. So we ignore it, she said. So we outvote it. He almost smiled. Say it, in words, not in blood, and if you do not want to say it, say that, and I will hear it. And nothing bad will happen. That is the entire point of everything we just did. The stove ticked. Fesk snored. Corrin Marrow, said Maren Callow. I have carried you up 406 steps, and I counted everyone, and I would do it again tomorrow. And I am saying it in words. I want this. With my own hand, in front of a witness, read aloud. The witness woke up briefly, said, about time, and went back to sleep. There is a plain gray stone in the burying ground at Stonewater, where the sheep pasture is a village again, and the words on it were recut by a mason paid out of the crown purse in the first month of the new reign. Beatrix Callow, under recorder, third desk. She recorded what was true. The tournament came back 7 summers later, because tournaments always do. Maren went down into the registration yard on the first morning, the way she did every year, because the Queen of Verith inspecting the beast lines had become a tradition, and because there were no beast lines anymore, and she liked people to notice that. The yard was mud and loud, and it smelled exactly the same, which she found she did not mind. There was a girl at the enrollment table with her chin up, and a hill accent, and nothing on her feet, entering a scarred, half-lame, entirely unremarkable gray dog in the hound trials, and 3 young alphas from a good coastal pack were making a meal of it. That's your pet? One of them said, and the yard laughed, because yards do. Maren stopped walking. She was aware of Isolde a step behind her, Marshal of the Registry these 4 years, the woman who reads the margins, who had personally overseen the reading aloud of 940 restorations, and had wept at exactly 2 of them. She was aware, across the yard, of a young man in a plain coat, with the collar deliberately open, standing very still, watching her the way he always did. The girl had gone red to the ears. Her hand was on the dog's head, and she was not letting go. Maren walked over. The yard went quiet in the way yards do when they realize who has arrived, and the 3 young alphas discovered a great many interesting things to look at. He's sound in the wind? Maren asked. Yes, ma'am. Your Majesty, ma'am. Then he's entered. She crouched down in the mud in her good coat and let the scarred gray dog smell her hand, and it did, and its tail moved once, uncertainly. It's a fair question, though, she said, loudly enough for the coastal boys to hear. It's the only question this kingdom ever really asks. What's that exactly? We used to answer it with a collar and a ledger, and we were wrong 4,060 times. She stood up. So take a good look at him, she said, and then ask me again in 7 years, and think before you answer about how many of the things you are absolutely certain about were only ever true inside a cage.